So first of all, has anybody heard of Handgame? No, didn't expect you to. That's okay. Different, but actually related question. Does anybody know who the indigenous people of the Santa Cruz area are?
Ohlone.
That's one answer. Any other answers?
It's like AW something. AOW.
I don't know how to pronounce it either. The Awaswas. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Or it could be the Uipai, the specific tribe. I guess Ohlone is sort of a after the fact constructed group of similar languages that some historians describe as being only as similar to each other as Spanish is to French, to put everything in European terms. I grew up in San Jose over the hill, which was sort of the Tamian area. Over this side in Santa Cruz was more the Mutsun side. There are some words that are common between the languages, but there's also a lot of vocabulary that's different. And there's actually a whole lot of history you can learn about this area. And I promise a few slides into this, we're going to get to this game called Handgame. We're going to make a formal model of it. We're going to do some comparative Anglo versus California style game playing simulations. But there's going to be a little bit of a detour through my hobbies and local history and so on. Okay, so if we were to look for Indigenous people, Santa Cruz, Wikipedia would be like, well, it was the Awaswas people, and they were sort of part of the group of the Ohlonies, and we can sort of look at this map of the San Francisco and Monterey Bay area and zoom into these different areas. Unfortunately, it doesn't have the terrain. The tribe that's active in the area now, in terms of trying to get organized and get recognition and so on, is the Amamutsun people. Who, do they have any representation on this picture? Oh, it says Mutsun over here. I'm going to skip over a whole lot of California history, but okay, here's the Uipai people right in where we are, or where I am right now, at least. And we're going to learn more about them later. Some of these people, like Aptos, we recognize that's one of the cities right nearby. Okay, back to the slide. On the left is a picture of a coast live oak. I took this picture like 2 days ago. These are a bunch of acorns growing on the tree for the various Ohlone peoples and the Miwok people a little bit further north, and lots of other areas in California. Acorns were like one of the what do you call it, the staple starch thing, like the main calorie providing part of the diet. It's not that people only lived on acorns, but it was like a thing in such supply that you could have lived off of that if you wanted to. There's some information from area parks about the history of cultivation of oaks and collection of acorns, and how to grind them, and how you can find these holes in the ground where people have been grinding for, thousands upon thousands of years, acorns in the same place to turn them into the meal that you can then eat. I grew up in this area. I had school field trips where we learned about this stuff, but now at whatever age I am, I've finally been starting to practice some of it. So down here on the left is my mortar and pestle with some acorns that I got. These are not the acorns from campus. It's from Castle Rock State Park, further up the Santa Cruz Mountains. I made it into a brownie-like cake. My daughter calls it acorn cake, so this is her hand grabbing it while I'm trying to take a picture of it. And it was somewhat brownie-like, and I've made a few other things from it. It's not a super exciting food, but it's a reasonable baseline that is only about as flavored as oats are. If you can picture the flavor of oatmeal versus wheat flour, the oaty one is a bit distinctively oaty. Acorns are a bit distinctively acorny, but otherwise pretty bland. There are people who are active in the native food space. This lady, Sarah, shares recipes and techniques. She was making acorn muffins a while ago and decided to put into them some bay nuts. If you've smelled the bay leaves from the bay trees on campus, a very distinctive smell, actually in the same family as the avocados, I guess. Anyway, so I don't have a picture of it, but in my kitchen right now is a paper bag of bay nuts they're drawing. I'm gonna roast them and try to make some other stuff into it later. This lady also has an example of, I guess they're also called pepper nuts, but I can't find any recipes that use that sense of pepper nuts. So you roast them, you grind them, and maybe you make an espresso type thing, because they have some chemical in them that is a stimulant. It's not caffeine, it's something related to it that has similar effects, at least for some people. I haven't tried that yet, but maybe I'll get into it with the stuff that this time I've actually collected right on campus. But there's lots of stuff written about the history of California, about this idea of balanophagy, which is, I don't know, Latin or whatever for acorn eating or nut eating in general, I think, maybe specifically acorns. And I was reading about this stuff recently, and there were a few names in this thing that I noticed from other bits of history I've been reading. One of them was this Kroger person, who I finally went to the Wikipedia page for, who did a bunch of native history stuff, including some game history. What was the quote I was going to pull out from this? There's some excellent quote here. I can't find out exactly where it was. Early accounts make few direct statements as to native food supplies, but the immense herds of deer, elk, and antelopes are spoken of a number of times. Later writers are astonished at the superabundance of the animals and waterfowl. It's probably impossible for us to conceive of the quantity of such game and the ease of which it could be procured. Kotzebue stated that one could ride among herds of deer without frightening them. Geese and ducks could be knocked over with a stick. So I'm picturing it's like just such bountiful food, acorns everywhere, enough for everyone. You want a goose or a duck, you just walk up and take it because there's so many of them. Compare that to food insecurity today in our, exciting technological society we live in.
And,
Wow.
and to show you how incompetent Portola and his expedition was, they almost starved to death and had to take handouts from the local people after they shot their mule and ate it.
While traipsing through a nutrient-dense area that other people are perfectly fine to live off of. Yeah.
But no cheese, no olives, nothing that a Spaniard would eat.
Yeah. I won't flavor this with too much history. But one of the things that was, again, surprising to me from a food security perspective was, and now I've experienced this firsthand, just like when you find an oak tree that's been dropping its acorns, you bend down to pick up one and you can just be, down there, and in 15 minutes, your bag is full. You can get a year's worth of food supply in a few days if you have the right kind of baskets to carry home with you. Compare that to like working month to month, or grad student salaries and so on. Imagine just having your food done. I spent 6 days on it or something like that. And that's your baseline food. You might want some fancier stuff on top of that, but you've got the rest of the year to figure out those things. And this idea that they had these acorn granaries, which of course the Europeans burned. There's histories of that, but most families had 2 years supply. So that if you had a low year with the acorn production, every family had like a backup entire year of supply, or your neighbors would have something like that. Wow. A lot of the names and places around here in Santa Cruz, there's like Bay Street, Laurel Street, there's the neighborhood of Live Oak. These are the plant names baked into our place names, or rather the plant names translated into Spanish, into English, and finally preserved now. But there's other names like Soquel, Aptos, and Zayante, which are twice transliterated Ohlone or probably Mutsun words for, I think Soquel literally just means meeting place, which was sort of like the city. Aptos was the name of the people, was the word, the people, for the people who lived there. I don't know what Zayante meant. I mean, I can look up the Spanish thing. But it's all this stuff is surrounding us and super interesting, including histories of games. So I got lost reading this document called Games of the California Indians by this Krober person. And what's sort of interesting is that the paper came out in 1920. Here we are in 2020. So yeah, game studies have been happening around here for 100 years. 100 years ago, we used to have grizzly bears, the ones featured on the flag. We had them for 2 to 4 more years until the last one was shot. There's some epic story of like the last grizzly bear in the Santa Cruz mountains. I guess it was a big, like dark silver one. I don't know. There's some document that I got lost reading about. But one of the things that's interesting in this relatively short paper is, let's see if I can find it. I can't search text in here, but I'll have to find it by hand. Some of you know that the natives in this area were called by the Spanish, or in English, we have the word Costanoan, which is the Anglicization of Costano, meaning like coast people. That's not what they call themselves. That's the Spanish people, the people who live near the coast. So there is a quote in this paper. I'm squinting to see if I can find it here. There is a mention of Costanoan here of this, what was called a football race. There are a bunch of variations of this. You might think of it as a field sport, but rather than being played on a giant field with a big ball that can roll and bounce really far, it's a sort of a less efficient ball, sometimes made out of 2 pieces of wood tied to a rope, or a rope with just knotted ends. So when you kick it, it can't actually go that far. You can play in a more compact space. But it's interesting that people 100 years ago were in this area taking notes on like, how do people play this particular sport? How does it vary here from just 50 miles south or 50 miles north, and keeping notes on that. We'll come back to another quote from this particular paper later in the programming section, but I want to highlight this other book called Games of the North American Indians. I believe I downloaded a searchable version here, and if I search for Rumsen, these are the people who originally lived in what's now Carmel, sort of south of us in the Monterey Bay Area. But there is this note here. I guess this is sort of a compendium of other anthropologists' notes. Note over here, there's a picture. This book is full of illustrations. And over here are 4 bones from the Handgame that we're going to be talking about. I'll show you video examples of these later. But here's a little snippet. The other game, named Tausi, is more easy. They play it with 4, 2 side by side. Each in his turn hides a piece of wood in his hands, whilst his partner makes 1,000 gestures to take off attention of the adversaries. It's curious enough to stand by to see them squatted down opposite each other, keeping the most profound silence, watching the features and most minute circumstances that might assist them in discovering the hand which conceals the piece of wood. They gain or lose a point according to their guess, right or wrong, and those who gain have the right to hide in their turn. There's guessers and hiders. The game is played to 5 points. The common stake is beads, not acorns. Like they weren't betting their livelihood, they were betting their sort of glittery treasure. Among the Indians, and among the Indians, the favors of the women. Maybe that was also the stakes as well. Why were they betting beads versus acorns? Well, as of the 1920s, the sort of acorn eating ecosystem was probably thoroughly disrupted by then. You can imagine all the best places to forage acorns had been fenced in and enclosed and put up rules, defended at gunpoint. I got my acorns out of a county park that explicitly says like no foraging, so I'm a criminal now, but I'm learning and teaching. But at least this is like specifically Monterey Bay Area, this hand game where you're holding things. I'll show you a little bit of a video in a moment of this game in action. And lots of the people all throughout, from parts of Mexico to what is parts of now Canada, have variations on hand game. Let's see. Have any of you played lacrosse? One. Oh, a few. Okay, yeah, that is a native game that I guess that the Europeans liked and have adopted and even played in the Olympics for a few years. I don't think that was played. There's not mentions of that in California, but there's other stick and racket variation things. Okay, so we saw the story about the Rumsen playing the Tusi game and saw that the common stake was beads. So it was sort of real money betting, but not quite, not the money you depend on for eating, but also not paper currency type betting that you might think of being associated with, I guess, current day Indian gaming. Oh, random things. This Alfred Kroeber guy turns out to be Ursula K. Le Guin's dad, who had the famous quote, "We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable, so did the divine right of kings." You can imagine that Ursula there, who is named after a bear, grew up with some exposure to other cultures that most kids didn't have. And also, this Kroeber guy, this anthropologist, recorded like on tape or whatever technology they had for recording voices, songs and poetry of the various Ohlone people that is now being used as the reference for how to speak these languages, because their last native speaker died in 1950, at least for the Mutsun language. And through recordings and field notes from anthropologists, they're trying to figure out how to speak their own language again. So it's, and you can even hear samples of this on Wikipedia, but I won't get into it. They're not the best recordings, but it's interesting that somebody who was, in the case of this other guy, Stuart Cullen, another anthropologist who specifically was examining games, whether the games of Korea, the games of American Indians, Hawaii, the Philippines, and so on. Think of this as 100 years ago, game researchers are going around also recording people's voices that are now being used to resurrect these languages for which this continuity has been lost. I think that's fascinating. And we talked about game theory in the last lecture. To mention game studies today, if you go to the game studies Wikipedia page, it says, well, before video games, game studies was primarily rooted in anthropology. And they say, well, now that we have video games, you can use all these other methods. But I had never like actually dug into the history of game studies as done by anthropologists. And then to find out that it had such like, there was so much of it to say specifically about the Santa Cruz area. So this thing called Handgame, and it's got a Wikipedia page because it's played like in a modern day. Often we'll see a bunch of YouTube videos that are very recent. Here's an example of the videos show the stuff better. I just mean to say that like the rules are written up. There's PDFs that teach you how to play it if you're new to it, because they want to teach the kids how to play it because it's a common cultural thing. So I'm going to reshare the screen with sound so you can hear their voice in these. Stop share, share screen, optimize for video clip, and share sound. Actually, I don't need the voices in this one, so I'll just skip to the relevant part. Right here on the ground are some of these bones. These are simple ones made by painting. Think of this as when you have one of these in your hand, people can't tell whether you have the black one or the white one. And in that guy's hand there, he's got 10 sticks that he's going to make into groups of 5. Going to make sure they're really in groups of 5. Then he's going to go over to the opposite team in a second here. And basically say, all right, other team, here's your initial allocation of 5 sticks. Let's shake hands. We'll play fair. Shaking hands is now part of the current thing. So that was the setup, at least for Paiute variation. These people are in Nevada, so they're maybe not playing by the California rules, or maybe it's been 100 years and things have changed. So at least that was the setup with the sticks. to get a look at the game pieces, we don't need sound for this one. I'll just skip through this video. It's saying if you didn't have the game pieces, according to this guy who has the word Salish in his name, that's a group of people up in the Pacific Northwest. I lived in Seattle for a while, so I had heard about the Salish when I was up there. By taking these sticks and just preferentially pulling off the bark in certain points, you can create the light and dark areas. And let's see. And in the end, yeah, to make the bones, it's either the all white one or the one with a little dark in the center that you're going to hide in your hand. And there's the whole setup for that one. So you can make these on the fly, or you could keep them around from year to year if you had some that were given to you that were special. I'm going to close a zillion tabs here to remember what I was doing. So this is one where we need some sound when I find the right part. So remember in the quote about the people in the Monterey Bay talking about the intense staring, the gestures, trying to fake people out. Let me see if I can, where's the, I'll let this guy talk for about a minute here.
Outside, the outside hand, and we go straight down the inside.
There are a lot of hand gestures where people kind of move their hands really fast, and that's what a lot of people call a fake shot, where they'll go like this, and it's not really a point, but they'll move their hands in certain gestures. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to get into the other player's head. Okay, which side is the bone? And if you're looking directly at the person that's shooting, most likely, if he goes like this, you're going to want to open your hand if he's shooting the wrong one. But if he goes like this, you're not going to want to open your hand because it's the right one. And a lot of times they kind of pick that up when they're doing the hand gestures, or they do fake shots where they turn back the finger like this, where it's no shot, but it looks like they're shooting that way, and somebody will open up and say, oh, I got him, and they'll shoot that way. So a lot of times, like I said, it's more of a fun game where if you're going to psych someone out, you don't have to go too far.
And I'm going to share the other way again.
Is your team across from you or sitting next to you?
Just a second while I rearrange the windows. No, I do not like the meeting. Okay, I don't know where the video of all of you went, but you can still hear me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'll just talk even though I can't see any of you. Okay, Montana asks, your team sits the same side as you? Yeah, it can be played with as few as just 2 people, but usually it's team versus team. And you sit with your team, and while you are hiding, when you have the things in your hand, the rest of your team is making all these distracting gestures to get people to look at and they're also singing songs that are meant to be catchy and distracting and so on, to make it harder for the opposite team to guess your intentions. And you're allowed to like hide it under your shirt or behind your back and so on. So there's, in terms of like parts that are not going to be well modeled by our software, there's a lot of interpersonal things that value these gestures and songs and so on. Did that answer it?
Yeah, definitely. Because I was wondering if it was charades where like your team is trying to, like you're trying to secretly signal to your team which one has the right one. But it sounds like it's more you're trying to prevent the other team from choosing which has the right bone.
Yeah. Unlike charades, there's no benefit, or like you can't kind of have a secret language with your own team to communicate. You're trying, the other team is trying to guess your thing, but presumably in a larger tournament, you end up playing against them a few times and learn their tells, or in the worst case, it's random. And in the best case, you actually have some tricks for getting people to reveal stuff. So it's I guess, skills involved, But it can, if you're not very good at guessing, sort of devolve back to randomness. And there's lots of videos of this on YouTube. Like here it's called La Hall or the Bone Game. People call it Stick Game, and they seem to play it with slightly different rules all over the place, at least in the videos I can find with the keywords that I know. So what we're going to do is calculate something about this. And I'll say, well, maybe we're going to do some computational comparative ethnoludology. I mean, we're going to heavily abstract things to model only one aspect of the game. And I'm going to set it up as the Anglo way versus the California way. It's obviously not that simple, but I'm going to try to integrate it with what we're doing in the class. And let me check the time. Yeah, I'm doing okay on time. So I linked to a notebook in here that is now actually accessible to people with a UCSC Google account. And so I'll open up this document again to find the one where he talks about contrary to our custom. Just okay, so these counters, basically how many points your team has before you win or lose the tournament. He's saying this guy, Krober, and this is specifically about the California Indians. He says, contrary to our custom, referring to, I don't know, what they would maybe say the Anglos, the English-speaking Europeans, not to be confused with the Spanish-speaking Europeans who did a different set of usually terrible things to the natives. Contrary to our custom, the Indians rarely begin with an equal number of markers on two sides, but with a neutral pile from which winnings are allotted to this and that contestant. Only after this stock is exhausted do they begin to win from each other, and the game continues until one side is without sticks. This may be an affair of minutes, but if fortunes are fluctuating and ability is even, you can imagine some people are better at guessing or tricking than other ones. If ability is even, one contest may be prolonged for hours. And this is going to be this like long tail, and we'll see this in histograms. So there's this kind of this question of the anthropologist thinks like, oh, then maybe the natural way I would play this is I give your team 5 sticks and I start with my 5 sticks and we start our contest. But in his experience observing people, they started with this neutral pile of say 10 sticks that you would sort of spend down to come out with your initial allocation through the first 10 rounds. And then those could, then you might run out of those, but you might actually be almost losing the tournament at the end of the resource allocation phase of the tournament. That's just that same quote there. So I got my notebook. I'm going to import the usual things we pull in, PyLab and our little progress bar thing. And I've got my Anglo and Cali style simulations. I'll just go through the Anglo one first. So the state of the game is, let's call it, team 0 and team 1, or left team, right team, each start with the initial allocation of sticks, 5. And then there's going to be some probability that somebody wins a round. I'm not modeling the actual one team is hiding, one team is guessing aspect of it. I'm just assuming that each turn, one team or the other can win. So I'm already abstracting stuff. The number of rounds played starts at 0. We're going to play until somebody loses. So it's going to be while true. I'm going to say rounds goes up by 1. And the winner is, if the random number was greater than P, team 1 versus team 0, 1 minus winner is just going to, this will be the opposite of that one. And if the number of sticks that the losing team had was 0, now the game is over. Like they were out of sticks and they would need to give up 1 more. That's the end of it. Otherwise, the number of sticks by the winning team goes up by 1, and the number of sticks in the losing team goes down by 1. In what is characterized as sort of the California Indian style, there's a neutral pile of sticks, which I'm just assuming that maybe you put all the sticks into one pile. So it's initial allocation times 2, so like 10, and both teams start with 0. The logic is fairly similar, but when we have a winner, if there's still more neutral sticks to give out, we just give the stick to the neutral team without subtracting from the, or to the winning team without subtracting from the losing team. Otherwise, this is the same logic from before. And even as I wrote this, I was like, well, here's a magic number in the code. Is that the right magic number? And it's hard to tell from video evidence, because at least what video evidence we have is of the Paiute people in Nevada playing by the Anglo style. But it's been 100 years since that paper came out. So, you know, maybe we're just playing Anglo style everywhere. But in the interest of not just learning about the indigenous people, but learning from them, maybe there's a different quirk of this game design, this idea of having a neutral pile. Let's investigate this to see what properties does this other game design have. A little bit of ugly code that, oops, I forgot to run the top cell. Run that. We get some pretty progress bars here as we play out 100,000 tournaments. And I've put in that the simulations go faster if I only give each team 3 sticks or 2 sticks, but 5 seem to be very traditional. To make it a little bit interesting, I said it's not a 50-50 chance of winning. There's actually a bias towards one team to model the idea that there's like some skill differential. And we'll just say, I don't know which team this bias is towards, but it's not 50-50. One of the first things we can find is that first looking at the minimum, like how fast can a tournament be over? The Anglo-style tournaments can end quicker. Think of it as if we give out 5 sticks each time, a very unlucky team can lose a stick per turn, and then on the 6th one, be all out of sticks and it's done. Whereas you can't possibly have lost the tournament in the California style until 11 turns have gone by. So there's a difference in the minimums, and there's also a difference in the means. The California style ones are longer. And I have tons of precision in this number, but really we want to look at this as a histogram. So I've got my 2 things here. Before I scroll down to those, my observations below, do any of you have any observations about this chart or comments about it, interpretations?
What is the value? Does that make sense of the, like, what are the X and Y axis of the numbers of the histogram?
Yeah, I could have, let's say X label,
Let's see.
I'll put semicolons behind those. So thank you for reminding me to label my axes. So tournament length being like how many rounds of this thing of like, I'm holding the bones and you guess which one of my hands contains the white or the black one. And if you're right or wrong, I give you a stick. Each time we do that, that's 1 round. And those can be done potentially within, you know, a few seconds to a minute while these distracting songs are going on. But you can see how in both cases, you could end up playing for hours in this setup. And that was written in the history there. But comparing the orange and the blue there, does anybody have like what story might you tell from this chart?
The Anglo version of the game is shorter generally, right? It's without having the neutral pile, you tend to play fewer rounds.
Well, yeah, one way to read that is from the average lengths, in that the Anglo ones are shorter. But one of the things I see in the distribution is that like there's an initial phase where the 2 game design variants are very different. And then there's sort of a second phase, think of it as after whatever randomness in the resource allocation phase has happened, where these 2 things track each other pretty closely, to saying that like past a certain point, it doesn't really matter how you started the game. They both sort of have a long tail that is very similar.
So I
go
would
ahead.
take from that the Anglo game would favor people playing with more experience, or people who are, you know, better at guessing.
Oh, one thing that I could do is I'll make a copy of this cell here, and I'll rerun my simulation with 1/2. And then we'll have two charts to compare, one sort of equal in skill, one where there is a differential in skill. And then we can see how the lengths are impacted by that. So now I've got them both on one screen. So it does seem like skill had a very big effect both on, you can picture how long these tails have to run out until they get towards 0, that when the skill is balanced, in both cases, the tails are very long, but it does seem like there's a whole lot more blue there's more blue to the left in the Anglo case. I don't quite know what it means. Any other interpretations of these? Oh, Henry says, why are the Cali bars denser? Yeah, my first observation is that the Anglo tournaments always have odd lengths, or maybe it's even lengths. I can't remember. But think about when trying to think of a simple intuitive reason why this is the case, that if I give both teams 5 sticks, both teams have an odd number of sticks. And if one team loses and they give a stick to the other one has gone down by 1 and one has gone up by 1. So they both have an even number of sticks. Oh, that's not the explanation. I don't know. A different diagram might explain it better, but there's a certain sort of parity to the Anglo tournaments, because things always, the number of turns the end of the game is away in terms of like a shortest path is always even or odd depending on the initial allocation of sticks, and that does not apply in the California style. And that prompted me to, I'll scroll to a different picture here. So now I have up to length 40, but I've grouped it into 20 bins to sort of group the evens and odds together. And we can see that now I've sort of made up for this density thing. But now it's the case that whereas these charts, it looked like these two tails were very similarly shaped. Actually, this is confusing. I'm going to go back to the 1/3 chance of winning, just so that my charts are consistent. Go progress bars. So here it looked like there was a difference in the beginning, and then the long tail looked almost the same. But it turns out that was masking the fact that if you added up these orange bars, they would be higher than the blue bar. So it's sort of like actually, this is the chart that shows that there's definitely this blue can end earlier and orange ends later. And I had this question left in the code of like, well, should we have 10 neutral sticks, or should we just have 5 neutral sticks? What effect is that going to have? Because one of them looked like it was just about twice the other one. I'll rerun this bit of code. So I'm trying to make the two variations of the game more similar by just changing numbers without changing their overall structure. So in this case, here they are, like the tails don't look very much similar anymore, or that there's more of a spike for the California case. I didn't give this thing, I don't obviously have the answer to it. I don't think anyone has ever done this sort of like cross-cultural statistical comparison. I don't know how to properly read these charts and interpret this as anything about civilizations and so on. I probably shouldn't interpret it that way. But it was an example of a thing where you can take something from history and turn it into a statistical experiment and then think like, well, given that it seems that the game is no longer played this way, or at least in the 3 out of 5 YouTube videos that I looked at where I could see the initial allocation, is it because the neutral pile was led to this beginning phase of the game where nothing interesting was happening, where you were just giving out sticks? Or did it lead to the idea that maybe tournaments tended to be clustered towards more regular lengths and not these super long tails where you might get bored because the same team is still going 45 minutes later, and maybe they only have 5 or 6 songs that they know during that time? There might have been reasons to prefer the neutral style, and we can speculate on those with some numerical ways to back up our speculation where we didn't have those guesses just by reading the text. So before I get into my last note there, any comments from the crowd about this experiment? What would you have done differently, or?
What happens if you reduce the number of runs? Do the shape of the outcome stay the same?
Oh, like if I only do, well, I'll just show 100 samples.
Right.
So now there's like a lot of ups and downs, and you're not sure, was there a spike at round 25 because of some structural feature, or because of I got unlucky with my samples?
Yeah.
So basically I just kept adding zeros here until things started to look smooth. Whereas here it's smoothed out, but there's sort of like a flat area and a spike and a dip. And I was like, well, that's not enough. Let's add one more. I should probably be adding error bars and so on. So maybe 10,000 was enough to get these things to look smooth. Because I already done the work to put the progress bar in there. It was okay to add like an extra order of magnitude. Whereas these simulations, if I had actually modeled the idea that there's a team that's hiding versus a team that's guessing, or that they might have different relative skills, my simulations might have gone a little bit slower and I wouldn't have done 100,000. This model is simple enough that I guess if I had thought about it mathematically, I could have derived these curves through algebra and calculus without simulations, but this class is more about getting the machine to do it rather than us to think about it carefully. I briefly invested a little bit of time looking to see if I could find stats on like good players or good teams to know, like say in baseball, you can look up stats for famous players, like what is their batting average and so on. I wanted to know what was a typical guessing average, like is a good team 99% accurate, or are they just 51% accurate? And it seems like Handgame doesn't have the statistical following that baseball does, so I couldn't find anything there. But if I could, that would have been a nice external source for what would be a realistic number to plug in for these. So as I learned a little bit more about this game and found it's like the bottom of the Handgame Wikipedia page, they're like, see also this other version played by the people in the Pacific Northwest, the Coast Salish, who speak the Chinook family languages. They have a thing called the kick stick, which isn't really well described here, but I saw it in a video. I think it was more of a Northwest thing, but now it's played in California and Nevada also. It's kind of like giving a handicap to the team that hides first. So imagine you're the team that starts with the bones in your hand. In that opening round, all you can do is lose sticks. So you're kind of at a disadvantage if you hide first. The kick stick is this 11th stick that is given ceremonially only after all your other sticks are run out, given to the team that went first as a way to balance it. And then a statistical question, if I had thought of this topic, more than last night, would be to try to measure like, what bias is there to the team that hides first, and does adding the kick stick fix that bias? Does it overcorrect? It's sort of like in chess, it's expected that I don't know what it is. White moves first, and therefore white does have an advantage. I don't remember the details. But it seems like this was a game balancing variation that got introduced one place and then is now widespread because there's people far away from the Chinook region who are still playing with this kick stick. And in fact, one of the videos we watched, I guess not, that's a little bit cheating. It's representing the Salish style. There's the 5 counter sticks, the 2 sets of bones, light and dark, and then the 1 sort of balancing kick stick that comes out at the end for the people who hide first. But it's now, at least in the Salish variant, it's considered part of the game to always have this 11th thing, whereas in the Paiute variant, when this guy was handing off the I don't know where it was. He had these like 5 very ornately designed sticks, but there was not like, or sorry, 10 of them, but there wasn't an obvious 11th super special one that was floating around. So presumably they don't play with one. And I can't remember. In one of the videos, I saw somebody comment on, do you guys play with the kick stick or not? So it seems like it's still a variant of the game being discussed by the community of peoples who play it, and they're not sure, should we adopt this rule variant or not? In some places, it's been played that way for hundreds of years at least, and in other places, they're still deciding whether we should do it or not. So I'm thinking as a research project in this class, I don't want everyone to do it. Like one person could sort of have the first paper in the world of computational comparative ethnoludology, analyzing the balancing effects via machine playtesting of the kick stick and making anthropological speculations based on the game design impacts of that thing. So I'll turn off the screen share at that point because I can see you again. That's the end of my show about Handgame. Any questions or comments about that?
Those are really interesting, like history and lecture. So thank you.
Good. I'm trying to do this thing where in all my classes, I bring in content that people would normally think of as sort of out of scope or try to relate it to current events. Like when you're in elementary school, they have all the kids make Columbus Day decorations of ships and so on. And it's like, what is the modern version of that that isn't, how do we do something different for Columbus Day? I just got carried away reading all this stuff on my phone to find numerical game balancing questions. If I had thought of it more than one day ahead, I might have made a model of Handgame in Machinations. That would have been a great way to integrate it, but I made it up all last night because I didn't have childcare yesterday. Do any of you think you might do something like this for a final project?